Ezra Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Baba Basra, daf Mem Zayin, and we're going to begin from daf Mem Vava Med Beis, Tana Rabbanan. It's about 4 lines from the bottom. So what we're discussing is, and it continues with this discussion of Chazaka, but it also continues of this parak Cheskas Habatim with the discussion of if you are related, if you have an interest in the outcome of a case, then you are disqualified to being a witness. So the Gemara, the Bryce is going to give you examples of people who are disqualified or could be qualified as a witness, depending. So the simon is Amalek. Taner Rabbanim, Orev, an Orev, that's the ayin. An Orev is a guarantor. So he guaranteed a loan. Doesn't mean that if in case the borrower doesn't pay back, then the guarantor has to step in and pay the loan. So let's say somebody is suing the borrower for a piece of land and claiming that the borrower does not own that land. So can the guarantor on a loan, on a separate loan, say testimony that this land belongs to the loiva? Well, I guess you would think that he is a related party, because if they take away the land from the loiva and the loiva, the borrower, has no other way to pay back a loan when it comes due, they're coming after the guarantor. So he would very much want that the land in question remains by the borrower. So it depends. If the borrower has other properties, so the loan seems to be more secure, then the guarantor could say testimony on behalf of the borrower that the land does indeed belong to him. Who? The Isle Arachrita. As long as the borrower has other pieces of property from where the loan could be paid out. So then the Orev is an uninterested party. So therefore, he can be considered to be a good enough to be a witness. Next, 2 lines from the bottom, Memvava Medbeis. Malva, a lender, I lent a borrower money, and now somebody's suing the borrower, trying to take away his land, claiming he doesn't own it. So a borrower is allowed to say testimony that the land indeed belongs to the borrower. Why? Certainly the borrower the lender has an interest that the borrower should remain with the property, so he should have where to collect his loan from. The answer is, if he has other pieces of property where the lender can collect his loan from, so then regarding another piece of property, he's considered an uninterested party, because it doesn't matter if the borrower loses the case, the lender still will have a place where to collect his loan from. So he's not considered to be disqualified as a witness, because the outcome of the case will not affect him. A purchaser number one, a seller sold one piece of land to one person, and he sold another piece of property that he had to another person. So that's the lokeach sheni. So now somebody's trying to take away the land from the second borrower, from the second purchaser. So now the only one that is going to be left with a land will be the first purchaser. So he's allowed to say testimony that indeed the land belongs to the second purchaser, the other person that bought a property from the same seller, because he's also considered to be uninterested, because Vahudi Isli Ara Achrita, as long as the seller has other pieces of land, it's not going to hurt the first buyer if they end up taking away the land from the second buyer, because even if there's an outstanding loan somewhere, they're going to first come to the seller, and if he has other pieces of land, he's not going to come after the first purchaser. Indeed, if the seller was flat broke, right? Let's say the seller was flat broke and he sold his last 2 pieces of property to one person and then to the second person. Well, the first person that he sold to has a very much interest that the second person land, because when a creditor will come to collect on a loan, he'll first come to the second purchaser and collect that loan, take away his land, foreclose on his land before he comes to Lekeach Rishon. In that case, the first purchaser is considered an interested party, and he would be disqualified to say testimony. So the only time he's not disqualified is if the seller has other pieces of land. Now we go to the top of the page before we go into a new sugya. Kablon, a guy who I would say an accepted. You put him on the contract. That means you lend a lender lends money to somebody, and this is more than a guarantor. He's saying a guy who's a kabbalah means I'm going to pay it back. In other words, you could have a choice. You could go after the borrower to collect your loan, or you could come after the kabbalah to collect your loan. So can he say, so a kabbalah is almost like he's guaranteeing a loan, but not after if the borrower can't pay. Even if the borrower could pay, the choice is on the lender from where he wants to collect from. So Amr Law made. Some say he's like a guarantor, and he could say testimony if the borrower has other pieces of property. But Amr Law anyway, and some say he cannot. He's a disqualified as a witness. Amr Law made. Some say that he's a good witness because Karav Dam. He's like a guarantor. We just said a guarantor is a kosher witness for a borrower. So also this kablan, which is one step more than a guarantor, is considered to be a kosher witness. But Amir Law and others say Ein Meid. Why? He's not a kosher witness because he still has a benefit that the land remains by a borrower. Because even though the lender has a choice to choose and maybe collect his loan from the kablan, but he would sometimes if he would rather have the borrower have baininess land, which is the land that a creditor is supposed to collect from, and Zuburis land. He wants the borrower, the original guy that took the loan, to have as much land as possible. So when the lender wants to collect, he can collect from the borrower. Because if the lender has a very small choice of land from where to collect from, then the lender will not go to the borrower. He'll right away come to the kablan. So therefore, the kablan has an interest that the land remains by the borrower. So therefore, if he has an interest, so therefore he's considered to be a disqualified aid. So that's what he said. Witness. He wants that the borrower has more lands, both lands, good land and not so good land. When the creditor wants to come, he'll have a choice of what to take from without reaching out to go to the kablan first. Because I guess the normal choice, that the lender will come after the guy that took the loan before he goes on to the kablan. Okay, let's do Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, Uman ein chazaka. We learned in the Mishnah, and we learned this before, that a guy who, let's say he's a tailor, right? So the fact that he holds on to an item doesn't mean it's his, because people give him items to fix. So he has no chazaka. He has to always prove where he purchased the item from. So if you see a tailor with a suit, he can't say, I lost the sales receipt. I bought the suit. No, he has to always prove that it's his suit, because maybe somebody gave him the suit and he's to fix and he kept it. But Ben Uman, his son, yesh lechazaka, he doesn't have to hold on to the receipt forever. And let's say after a period of time, he can lose the sales receipt, because as long as we see him with the suit, we Oris ein lechazaka, an employee, somebody who's working for somebody's property, ein lechazaka. So he has no chazaka on that property, because if he was an employee and he was there for many, many years, doesn't mean it's his. It's like having a worker in your taking care of your estate. Doesn't mean it's his. He's just a worker. So he can never establish chazaka unless he can prove with the purchase document that it's his. That Aris, his son, who never worked for the landowner, yesh chazaka. He's there for 3 years and nobody said anything, that it's his piece of land. Gazlan, someone who steals, right? Uben Gazlan and his son, ein lem chazaka. Here it's interesting. A crook who steals property, or his son, never can establish chazaka. They always have to, let's say you have a known Gazlan in the neighborhood. So not only he always has to prove that he purchased the property, but his son also doesn't have a chazaka. Ben Benoy, but his grandson, Shel Gazlan, then Yesh Chazaka. Then if he's on a property and his grandfather was a crook, but he himself is not a crook, then he could establish a chazaka and he does not have to hold on to the purchase document forever. So the Gemara wants to understand what Rabbi Yochanan said. Hey Kadami, what's the case over here? If he said that each one said, the son said, I got it from my father, so even if they're coming from their father, that they say they inherited it from their father. So really, then maybe just like their father had no chazaka, they should also now have a chazaka because they're getting it from their father. Now maybe the father just didn't buy it; he stole it. So what's the difference? Why do we say no? The son has the chazaka and the father and they don't. It doesn't matter. Either loy also b'tainas davia, and if they're not coming from that they got it from their father, but rather they're saying that they purchased it. Say the son of an uman said he purchased it, or the son of an employee said I bought this land. So we believe them. Why not? So I feel the ben gazlan nami. Even if you're the son of a gazlan, let's say a guy we know his father was a crook, right? But he himself is not a crook. So if he's on a piece of property for 3 years and we ask him, how did you come to this property? And he says he bought it, we have to believe him because why not? He's saying that I bought it and he's been there for 3 years and nobody said anything. So why do we say that a Ben Gazlan is not doesn't have a chazaka, but a Ben Ores has a chazaka, a Ben Uman has a chazaka? Answers the Gemara like Tzricha, the Gemara is talking about the Ka'amri Edim. Edim say, Bifonenu hoidoloi, that the witnesses say that the original person that owned this property agreed that he sold it or that he agreed that he gave it to these people. So Hanach, let's say the son of an Oris, so we can say that that it's true. In other words, their father bought it or they bought it, and therefore, because and we have witnesses that say that the original owner at one time said, yes, I sold it to such and such a person. So we believe them. Hi, but a Gazlan, afagav the oide nami loy mehemen. Even if you know for a fact that the owner of the field agreed that he sold it to the Gazlan, to this crook, then we will not believe, even if the son, while it's in the domain of the son. So if the son is holding on to the property, and there are witnesses that said that the owner of the field one time agreed that he sold it to his father, the Gazlan. Still, the son is not believed unless he can prove the purchase, can somehow dig up the purchase document. Why? Because the father was Maida, that it belonged to the Gazlan because he was scared. Because what Rav Kahana said, the Rav Kahana, sometimes you're intimidated and you say something and you don't really mean it. The Rav Kahana, if the owner of the field would not have admitted that the field belongs to the Gazlan, then the Gazlan would have tattletaled on him regarding taxes or things like that. It would give him over to the police. So he was almost like blackmailed into being moida to that. So therefore, we don't believe when it's in the hands of the Gazlan, certainly, and we don't believe when it's in the hands of the properties in the hands of the son of the Gazlan, even though we have witnesses that say that the owner of the property one time said, oh, I sold it to the Gazlan. But for the grandson, we will say that we will believe him because he's like 2 steps removed from the place. And when his father, who is not a Gazlan, died, he could have said, I purchased it. So the fact that he didn't get it from that person. So the fact that the grandson is now holding on to the property, we're going to believe it, but not the son himself. Amar Rava said, sometimes Shafila ben Benoy Gazlan, the grandson of the Gazlan, Name Ein Chazaka, will never be able to establish a chazaka. Hey Chidami, how is that the case? When he comes and says that I got it from my grandfather. My grandfather, it bypassed my father, and I got it from my grandfather. So then The grandson is like the son of the Goslin. And therefore, just because there are witnesses saying, that the owner of the field in front of people said, oh, it belongs to the Goslin, he was blackmailed into doing so. So it doesn't mean that it's the Goslin, he really meant that. And therefore, even if for many years this grandson of the Goslin was living on this property, we can assume, we don't say that it automatically belongs to the grandson. So now the Gemara says, hey, chidame Goslin, what's called a Goslin? What do you mean? How do you define a Goslin when it comes to property? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, that we know that at one time he stole this field. They went to court and he had to return the field. And then somehow, without anybody realizing, he's back onto that field. So we see that he's out to get this field. So he's considered a Goslin on this field. And but Rav Chisda said, it's a Goslin doesn't mean that he stole this particular field, but he's like from the mafia family. Going to base Pliny, they kill people for money. So what the Gemara got through saying over here, and this ends this sugya, is that a Goslin, someone who's like a part of the mafia, even there's witnesses that say that the owner of that field agreed that he sold it to the mafia family, we still will not consider that their field. And in fact, even if it's in the hands of their son, let's say the mafia guy died and his son is holding on to that field for many years, we will say that it's not the son's field, because the only reason why the owner of the field admitted that the field belongs to the Goslin because he was intimidated to do so. But that only works by a Goslin. But the grandson already, if it's by his grandson already, then we'll allow it to remain in the mafia's family if it's by the grandson. But a uman, a worker, the son of a worker will have a chazaka, even though the uman himself doesn't establish a chazaka, but the son will. Nu Gemara. Tana Rabbana. Uman ain't like chazaka. Again, a guy who's a tailor, right? So as if he is holding on to a suit, we don't say it's his. He has no such a thing of chazaka. Maybe somebody dropped it off and he kept it. Yarad miminase, but let's say he left his business, he closed up shop. Yesh le chazaka, then he can establish chazaka on something. Oris ain't le chazaka. If you're an employee, you have no chazaka. If you worked on a property for many, many years and you still considered an employee, so you have no chazaka. But yard me'erisasa, let's say everybody knows you retired from being an employee, and then years later you come back to that field, and we see you're on the field for many years. Yesh lechazaka, and then we can assume that you purchased it if you say so. You purchased it, you can establish a chazaka. Ben shechalak, a son that used to work on his father's fields, and then they split up. His father and son split up. Or the ishish and his garsha, a woman who was married, and she was always busy with her husband's field, and now we find out she's divorced. Harehen keshar koladim, they're like everybody else, that they could establish a chazaka. Again, because if they have no business to be on the field, certainly a woman who got divorced has no business being back on a field that belonged to her former husband. And if she's back on the field for 3 years and nobody said anything, it must be that if she says so, that she bought it from her former husband, we'll believe her, even though she can't prove it, because she could establish a chazaka. So the Gemara says, Bishlam, I understand very well, Ben shechalak itzrach, a son that doesn't work for his father anymore, because I would think that even though he doesn't work for his father anymore, I would think that he cannot establish a chazaka, because when a son, breaks up with his father, sometimes he'll still walk around with in his father's field, because he assumes his father will certainly forgive him for hanging around the field. That the father would be moichel and let him stay in the fields, but it really doesn't belong to the son. That certainly not. If he split up from his father, and then now we find the son in that field, that must be that the son bought the field off his father, and therefore he could establish a chazaka. But a woman that got divorced, certainly she's like any other person. She's nothing. She's like a stranger, and therefore, if we see her in that field for 3 years, we could assume it's hers. So what's the novel of that teaching? Answers the Gemara, like tzricha, we need it to teach you like this. We go to Amud Beis. Sometimes a woman is quasi, like Rab Zera said. How do you make somebody half divorce? Means you throw a get to the woman. The husband threw a get to the woman. We don't know if it landed in her dalet amos or it did not land in her dalet amos. So this get established that she's half divorce and not divorce. The husband is still obligated to provide food for her until he gives her a real divorce. So now this woman is somewhat divorced, and if she's found around the fields, I might think that really the field doesn't belong to her. She can't establish a chazaka, and the whole reason why she's around that field because her husband said you can collect food from my field. So that's what I would have thought. So Kamash Malan, no. Once he's already started the get process, he doesn't want his wife to be around his fields anymore. He would never want his wife around his field. And if he's obligated to give food for his wife, he'll figure out a way to give her the most minimal amount of food. So, and if we find her around his field for 3 years and nobody said anything, then she could establish a chazaka that it's her field. The Amr Abzeira, Amr Abiyri, Amr Mishmuel, Kamokam Shamra Chachamim Mugreshes Ve'enim Mugreshes. When Chachamim said that a woman is quasi divorced, so then it's not like she can't marry somebody else till she gets a full divorce, but nevertheless, the husband is still obligated to provide food for her. And since you would think that now she can still walk around his properties, and therefore she cannot establish a chazaka because she's almost like she's married to him. The opposite is true. That no, since he started the divorce process, she's looked at as a stranger, and she doesn't belong on any field belonging to the husband. And the fact that she is on the field belonging to the husband, and she's there for 3 years, then she could establish a chazaka. Amma Rav Nachman, Amma li Huna. Rav Nachman said, Huna told me. Uman cannot, let's say, we just said, if you own a suit, right? And you're a tailor and you have this suit, you have to prove that it's yours. You don't have to prove that you paid for it. You just have to show a receipt. So Kula, in all cases, Shavi and Ryan, if they bring up the purchase receipt, that's all the receipt, Rayos and Raya, that's a good proof. A worker that shows the purchase document that he bought the property, it's his. Umamidin Sada Biyadam, we let them keep the field. Gazlan, but a guy who's a known thief, Shehevi Raya, he brings up a receipt, Ain Rayas and Raya. His proof is not a good proof. You have to show me where the check cleared. You have to show me not only that you gave a receipt, but you have to show me where the money cleared your bank into the sellers. We don't keep the field in his possession because we don't trust the Gazlan until he proves it 100% that it's his. Not only the receipt, but also he has to prove that he actually paid for it. Says the Gemara, my kamashmalam. What is the novelty of that teaching? Tanina, isn't that a Mishnah? Lokach, if a Jew purchased misika karain from a mafia person, this misika karain would steal land from Jewish people and resell it to other Jews. So if a Jew bought it from the misika karain, and then to be sure, he now purchased it also from the original owner. So mekhay bato, then the transaction is nullified because the only reason why the original owner sold it to him because he was afraid of the sikak that will come after him if he doesn't agree to the sale. Because so therefore, a guy who bought it from the sikar karain and then went to the owner and said, "I'm buying it from you too." So then the transaction is nullified because anybody who can threaten somebody, we don't believe them at all. So here is somebody that's coming, not the thief itself, but somebody from the balabayas, and we can see that he was threatened, and therefore the transaction is nullified. So we can see that even if a Gazlan shows a purchase document that says he bought the field, we should not believe him because we can say that the person that wrote the document was coerced into writing up that document, and therefore this is what the Mishnah is basically teaching you. So what do I need Huna to teach you that? It's an open Mishnah, and says the Gemara Lapuki de Rav. That's because Huna wanted to say we don't hold of Rav. The Amar Rav said, Loishan the Amalei Lake Chazi Ukni. The only time that if you bought it from the owner, that the transaction is nullified in the Mishnah is only if it was verbal. He said, okay, you can have it. Al Bashtar, but if the owner actually wrote it down in a document, kana, it works. So I might think if a Goslin shows a document that he bought it, we should trust him. We shouldn't say that the owner who wrote the document was coerced. Kamash Malam Tishmuel, we hold like Shmuel, the Amar who said, Af Bishtar Nami Lekana. Even if the Ganef has a star, if the Ganef shows a star, it doesn't mean it's his. Until the original owner wrote that he takes responsibility and he's giving title insurance forever if the property gets taken away from the Goslin. Or so therefore, once we see that there's more to the document than just a plain sale, so then we can see that it's true. But as long as it's just a regular sale agreement, but with no insurance, nothing like that, and the Goslin shows it up, we will not believe that it belongs to the Goslin unless he proves that he actually wrote a check and the check cleared his bank account. One more line. Rav Beba Messiah Bo Mishmei de Rav Nachman. Karka Einloi Avamois Yeshloi. Wow. He said, right, let's say you're taking back the money, you're confiscating a piece of land from a Goslin. You say, we don't trust you. But if he paid for something, right? If he paid for something and he could just prove that he paid for it, we're going to give it back his money. We're going to figure out that the owner of the land has to give back the Goslin the money. But when does the owner of the land have to pay back the Goslin? Shamru Adim, the Adim say, the witnesses say, but we saw the Goslin count the money in front of us to give to the seller. Aval Omru Adim, but Adim said, in front of us, the seller said, I received money, loy. Because if the seller said in front of Adam, oh, don't worry about this Goslin, I got money from him, we can say that he was just saying that because he was afraid of the Goslin, because the Goslin, if he didn't say that, the Goslin would go out and tattletale on him to the government. Rav Kana, Rav Kana, if he wouldn't have been agreed to it, he would have put him and his donkeys back into the government. So therefore, that doesn't prove anything that the moicher actually received money from the gavnif, and therefore, when the tides turn and there's justice, and the moicher gets back his karka, that's it. Then we don't make him pay the ganef back unless we know for sure that the ganef paid money for the land.